TV turned itself on.
What's going on? Why isn't anything working? Everybody's out in the hallway.
That's the same sound that was coming through the phone.
I should have gone to Vegas.
Oh, you'd have found something to fall over in Vegas too, mate.
What's your fucking problem? I wasn't gonna...
One out of two people just started killing each other. They just decided to kill people.
So we're going to talk about it then or not?
We had bad dreams, all right?
And so Dave Bruckner, welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of this. So I've known Dave for going on 20 years now because we're old.
What?
Yeah. We met at XPT, I think. You did a little short film for them, and I was doing a puppet piece for the Center for Puppetry Arts, and we immediately, well, not immediately, we kind of jived, and Dave and I really connected at the Dailies program at Push Push Theater, which was a film collective that we were a part of back in the early aughts, mid to early aughts. And Dave started it with some college buddies and some other people at this workshop theater, which was really one of the most educational times in my life and a lot of people's lives as filmmakers, I think. My favorite mantra that we had was Dailies is a safe place to fail. And I think that is a rare and beautiful thing when it happens. So Dave has made several films there, and also as a part of the collective that created The Signal, which was a independent film that shot here in Atlanta back in 06, I believe, something like 05, 06. You guys made it for somewhere around 60 grand, and it sold for about $2 million at Sundance that year. And from there, you went on to develop some other projects. We had the privilege of working on a anthology series called VHS. Ours was the first one, and I would say the most notable and memorable one. It certainly was the only segment that got a feature-length film made based on it. So I production designed that, Dave directed it, and Molly, you worked on it a little bit too, Molly.
Cleaned up blood for it.
Yeah, yeah, that was a while back. And yeah, Linda Burns was a producer on that, and that really brought the band together. And we were at a studio film collective called Studio Outpost back in the day. So now Dave has moved on to awesome things in Los Angeles. He moved out there a couple years ago and has made several projects. We'll get into kind of the details of like how your journey led you to where you are now, but you did a couple more anthology films and then landed The Ritual, which was your first feature film, which sold at, with Andy Serkis produced it. And it was that Andy Serkis's first produced feature for his company?
No, they had one that they did around the same time called
Yeah. One of his first produced feature films. And it went on to, I mean, so you shot that in Europe and the UK. And then it went on to sell at TIFF for quite a bit and got picked up by Netflix. And now he's moving on to a host of other projects that are very cool, and some of which we can talk about and some of which we can't. So yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll ask this the first question that I kind of steamrolled over, and then we'll get into some other ones. So Molly, would you mind asking that?
Yeah, Michelle Caruso specifically asks, Let me go back up. Sorry. What advice do you have for writer directors that want to make the jump from short film to their first feature film?
Great. Okay. All right. So I maybe take this moment to say, first of all, I have no idea what the filmmaking industry process is going to be like after coronavirus. It might be a little different. So duly noted, guys, the world's changing. But I really, my answer to this, for what it's worth, has always kind of been like, everybody I know that's making features got into it in a different way. You know, there's really no rules. It's still a bit the Wild West. How do you, if you're an independent filmmaker, convince somebody to, you know, bet a sizable amount of money on an idea that you have, is kind of the question that everybody's after in a way. I certainly think it helps to have some really great shorts under your belt. And now that I'm at a place where I'm able to produce some things, I have an executive producer role on a few different projects now. I've been playing that role here and there over the years because sometimes I start projects or I influence them creatively, or like our VHS short, for instance, became a feature for Chiller Network because I, was part of the team that created that originally. They obviously looked to me to develop it. So in those situations where I am playing the role of a producer, there's a lot of hurdles that you have to get a project made. And one of the biggest ones is, convincing either the studio or the money people or the actors or everybody involved to rally around a director. Like they have to believe collectively that this person has a voice, that they have something to say, an energetic presence, something to offer. And it just generally the excitement that comes from the directorial choice just feeds into every other avenue of the film. So the best way to present that over and over and over again is just stellar shorts, and also voice, who you are, where you come from. Diversity is key right now. The world's changing on that front too. It makes for all new, interesting kinds of stories and messages that can be brought to an audience. So I think, if I had to boil it down, advice for making the jump between shorts and features, it's just make the greatest short you possibly can. And somewhere along the way, hopefully you'll meet people of influence or people that are getting things done, whether grassroots independent style or people that have connections to bigger dollars, studios and production companies. And word spreads, people notice good work and they trade it around. And I know a few filmmakers right now that have had a great short for, several years that has made the rounds, that have been attached to several feature projects that are still trying to get it done. And that was very much my journey, is that I was fortunate to be on these anthology films, as Raymond mentioned. The first movie that we made, The Signal, was kind of a bizarre anthology feature hybrid, which then led to me getting the phone call about VHS, which then years later after that, when VHS made enough noise that I was getting attached to features in Hollywood, sometimes with studios, sometimes sizable properties, trying to get them made, we were able to, gather some of the anthology filmmakers together and go do another anthology, Southbound, just to sort of shoot some adrenaline into our careers at that moment and go shoot something while we're kind of spinning our wheels developing. And so in that circumstance, again, every time we did that, we got to present a short film through a feature template because it was an anthology and people were able to see it. So it was a way to audition our short films as well. But overall, in all of those cases, me getting hired on a feature or me hiring somebody on a feature always came down to just that piece of work, that 15 to 25 to 30 minute short film that is easy to send around. It's easy for people to see, and it's really a showcase.
Let me ask you, we have a couple of questions, but going back to the short film, since you did hire people based on the short films, can you get into as specific as you can, what about their shorts really jumped out to you?
So we just started, there's a feature that I'm doing with the Imaginarium, and we hired, which is the company that produced The Ritual, and we hired an exciting young director for that. His short was just scary as hell. You could just tell instantly that he you know, he had a handle on the uncanny. He had a way with actors. You know, a big part of it was feeling like somebody had a confident command of just the basic tenets of storytelling. You know, it's hard to say. It could be any number of things, but part of it too, I think, beyond just having a creative voice, is also feeling like, you know, I would say it's impressive if the short, at least in the horror, you know, in the horror genre where I work, where they let me work, it's impressive to see that somebody has command over the different avenues of the medium. You know, it's like, are they good with actors and performance? Are they good with pace? Can they handle gags? Is there a sense of style? You know, tone management is a big thing. Does it feel like the same movie from start to finish? You know, sometimes you can sort of feel it when something veers, you know, wildly in a different direction. It doesn't necessarily feel like somebody has a really firm grasp on something. But yeah, I mean, typically there's a lot of great work out there, and it's a bit of an embarrassment of riches, you know, so it seems pretty competitive. There's a lot of great shorts.
Cool.
I have a question. So like Roxanne Benjamin talks a lot about how, you know, she had a movie in theaters and was still working as a server in a restaurant, and like just the dichotomy of success, like being in the press and all the things that people are talking about, but still being a struggling artist, and kind of like feigning success while struggling. And I know a lot of people in here are filmmakers, and a lot of people have mostly obviously just had struggles. Like, how do you deal with people thinking that you are, quote, like more successful necessarily than you are, and maybe thinking that you don't have struggles anymore because you have sold movies?
It's just kind of like a running joke between directors, in my experience, is that, you know, if you're lucky enough to sell a movie, then, you know, there's a price tag attached to that. And people think, you've made it, you're over on the other side. And to be fair, we thought that, you know, we shot The Signal for, you know, just under 60 grand, sold it, as Raymond was saying, for a little over 2 million at Sundance back in 2007. And, you know, that was both me and the other two directors on that. Again, it was an anthology, Jacob Ventry and Dan Bush. I think maybe me more than them, they were a bit wiser to this. Sort of thought, oh, that's great, I get to be a director now. Like, I'm going to have a job. I'm going to be out of doing local commercials and cobbling together a living in all the different ways I was as a freelance video guy at the time living in Atlanta. And nothing could have been further from the truth. You know, it was, it took years and years and years for me to really turn that stuff into dollars. And I would say it's only been in the last, say, 3 years that I haven't had some kind of side hustle going on. And even then, those 3 years have been quite harrowing at times. You know, we all have these funny stories. One of my favorites was after selling The Signal, a friend of mine was a teacher at a high school, and she asked me to come speak to the graduating class about the filmmaking process. And it just so happened that the financial collapse of '08 had just happened. And I just sold this movie, and it looked like I was doing great, but I actually didn't have any money at all. And it was one of these weird moments, kind of like right now, where nobody was doing business, you know, and you know, you were getting phone calls from people that used to hire you in the freelance community going, do you have any work? And you're like, why are you calling me? This is terrifying. And I was in my early 30s, and I hit a wall, and I couldn't make the rent. And I called my father, it was just, you know, it's like, Dad, I got to borrow a little cash. And, which I was reluctant to do. And he said, cool, drive out to the house. Just so happens that the house was right next to this high school where I had to give the speech. So I went by that day to pick up a $500 check. And then I went up on stage in front of this graduating class with the check in my pocket and told these kids to, like, follow their dreams. And, and debated telling them the truth, which is like, I'm totally broke, by the way. But, and there were many more chapters after that, you know. I went completely belly up in 2013 to 2 sizable features, and you know, still ran out of money. So yeah, I think it's great that Roxanne says that. I mean, that's definitely something that we trade in quite a lot. I think even when you're kind of up and running, making features, you sort of have to balance it and find side hustles, because as a director, inside the system, and certainly outside the system as an independent filmmaker, I expect this to be even more the case. You don't really get paid until they roll camera. You might get a development fee on the front end, but it's really not until they roll camera. So the game becomes, how many projects do I have to set up at once in the hopes that one of them gets across and actually becomes a movie? And sometimes that can mean developing for 2, 3 years on these projects until one of them comes to fruition. So you got to be like a year ahead financially just to survive. And the way to do that is to find some way to diversify. If you're really lucky, you direct television. I've cobbled together some money writing. In most of the other avenues of filmmaking, it's just so competitive, and all the different craftsmen are far more talented than I am. I'm a pretty good editor, but I'm not as good as the editors I work with now. So I'm not going to get work doing that necessarily, And so I would say it's, some people direct commercials. Some people are lucky enough to have, carved out a corner in music videos. I think one of the great things about independent filmmaking is that you kind of have to be good at so many things. You have to know something about all of these different disciplines, that it's certainly, I think, smart to try and carve some expertise out in a few of them and keep the dream alive, making cash, as we all do here. I know Molly and Raymond, it's the same game for all of us in that regard.
Real quick, we'll get to some more folks' questions, but going back to your different experiences at Sundance, what do you think that, I don't want to say you did wrong, but you wish you could have done or would have known the first time around, that you really once you went back to Sundance, you're like, okay, I got to redo, I'm going to attack this at every angle I can. What do you think you learned from that first time or didn't do that you eventually did the second time or third or fourth time?
I think to have been fortunate enough to have a feature like The Signal at Sundance in 2007, even though it was an anthology and there were 3 directors on it, we got enough energy after that if I'd had a really great semi-low budget screenplay ready to go, I could have jumped to a feature almost immediately. There was enough interest. I was in enough rooms with financiers. I was getting enough calls that if I had been a little to the wiser, I could have parlayed that into some opportunities. Instead, I was completely green. I didn't know anything about how to navigate the agencies. And I wasn't super ambitious about pushing that stuff forward because I was a little uncertain. I felt like I had a lot to learn. So I had to go back to the drawing board and try and write those scripts. And I spent the next few years writing several scripts with various writing partners and trying on a lot of different hats in that regard. So it took me 9 years after that, 8 years after that 8 years to get a feature film out, lots of ups and downs. And even with VHS, which, got a lot of recognition in the horror community, got me an agent at WME and got me a great manager and a lawyer. I was taking big studio meetings. I was getting attached to major franchises. I was on Friday the 13th developing for Paramount for a year and a half. Got a lot of press off of it, and still couldn't turn it into cash. I never made a dime off that movie. Ultimately, the project fell apart because that tends to happen through the studio system. I had accelerated into this other game without having made a feature. And so if I'd gone to Sundance originally and had my next project ready to go, I would have been in a great position. I think I would have moved faster. And so I think maybe one of the challenges is that, if you're just getting started, you're writing a lot, or you're working with writers a lot, but there is a long front end of this where it's definitely, I think, useful to develop material and just have it ready. So when that short comes out and people get a hold of it, they see it and they're loving it, or whatever project opens a door for you, you have something ready for them to go. I think that's always wise.
Great. Molly, do you want to take a question from the group? Oh, I think you muted. Can you hear?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
Rob Scheimer said, there's little film industry in my little town. How do I create to just make a short? He lives in South Georgia, so he has trouble finding people around him that want to make movies. Do you have any suggestions for him to find his tribe and how to make movies?
Well, I like how you say it. I mean, you got to find your tribe. like it's a community art form in every way imaginable. And, you know, it's good to find people that have the same interests as you do, and they have the same things to gain. If you can't find that in a small town, you should move, you know, just to be honest, get out of there, go to Atlanta's a great place, get to a city. You know, there's so much energy in Atlanta right now, and people are, you know, thriving to create things. I think, I mean, you guys can speak to it better than I can, but it is essential, I think, to be immersed in an environment where, in a competitive environment where people are making things all the time. You'll rise to it in ways you wouldn't possibly imagine. But being isolated, I find that would be pretty challenging.
Well, that kind of leads into the question about your choice to move to LA from Georgia, and how important you think that is to like your rise in the industry.
I think it was important for me, only because I think it had less to do with the way the industry works and more to do with the fact that I'd spent 13 years in Los Angeles, in Atlanta, and I just needed a life change. You know, I just needed to do something different. I needed to scare myself. LA was frightening in some ways. I mean, there was a big, huge system that I didn't understand. And part of it too was that moving to LA made sense for me because I had scored an agent after VHS. And so I had some representatives that were very interested in putting me in rooms. So I was flying out to Los Angeles a lot. And I saw an opportunity to engage a bit more with the Hollywood system. And that was a decision that I made. And thus far it's been productive, but it could have very easily gone the other way. You know, I could have continued to make independent films in Atlanta. Many of my collaborators were in Atlanta, and I had a lot of great creative artistic stimulus from the people around me. And I don't know, I may return one day. Like I sort of always dreamed of the idea of building something from the ground up in a town like Atlanta. And, you know, we'll see what the future holds. But I think the most important thing is to find a way to make your content and, you know, get your stories out there and follow the opportunities that you have necessarily. I think, you know, moving to LA blindly with no connections, you know, it's going to take a while to get it moving unless you get really lucky. Most of the folks I know out here, it takes a while. I mean, like I said, I had reps and it took me years and years.
Do you think that it's still, I mean, obviously people are very hopeful that it's gotten easier to stay in Georgia, but I think some of that is just hopefulness versus reality. Do you think that it's easier now versus like 2007, like, you know, to be able to stay in Georgia and have get to the same meetings and have the same opportunities that you have?
I think you have to engage with Los Angeles. You know, I mean, it's just it's a numbers game at a certain point, you know. I mean, for me right now, my ratio that I try and keep is like 8-1. Like I have to have 8 projects in the works at any given time for the hope that like one of them is going to get made. And every one of those 8 is like, you know, you love it. They're your babies. You know, you have people attached to them, producers, writers that you believe in, that everybody's betting on this thing. And it is a big difference between people talking about making something and people pushing it forward in small meeting rooms, and then people actually writing the check that allows you to roll camera. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong along the way. So one of the things that I think Los Angeles gives you is there's just an abundance of businesses, independent film companies, financiers, you know, producers, writers. There's just a lot of people out here that are trading in those projects. And you know, if you know people, if you have a doorway into that, you know, you're going to just increase your likelihood to get things set up and get them moving. And, you know, sometimes I think that the challenge of being in Atlanta might be, and again, I haven't been there, you know, living there for probably, I think it's been almost 6 years now, is that you're kind of in a vacuum and you're creating all on your own. And you might find yourself with one passion project that you're working on, hoping to see it come to fruition, and you could end up in a cycle where the financing is falling through, and then the financing is coming back up, and it might get made, it might not get made. Suddenly years are going by, and that's where it makes sense to have more than one project if you can. But can you do that in Atlanta? And can you, moonlight in LA when take meetings? Absolutely. I definitely think that at least out here, I don't detect a huge stigma around not being in Los Angeles. In fact, my experience is that most people in Los Angeles don't even think of themselves as Angelenos, especially not in the industry so much. So I don't detect like a giant identity about that. In fact, sometimes the story is that once you get far enough into it, you can leave LA and go live somewhere else and still do what you're doing.
And it also depends on what you're trying to do too, because you've had the privilege of being able to, get meetings with industry execs and, producers and studios and whatnot. Whereas if your goal is to make your indie with, 100K or 200K and go for it, then that LA may not be the best place for you. I will say though, I think I want to reiterate the fact that you had that 8 projects to get one off, I think is something that a lot of people don't realize, is because they walk around with a briefcase with their one script, going door to door, trying to get it made, not realizing that they got to have 8 other projects. And then, you wonder why that one thing isn't working out, It's just a reality. Even in LA, that's the reality. You got to just shotgun blast it.
Absolutely. And people pick up on it too. If you have a few things in development or a few things going on, like, a lot of people in this industry know each other and word of mouth spreads. And, film companies can get competitive about getting a project done with you when they're kind of afraid that they're going to lose you to something else, but I think it all comes back to industriousness. It's, I think you have to greet this as, as an artist who makes things all the time. And when something's not going your way or something hits a roadblock, you're developing something else in another direction, and in a weird way, I have found, and I don't know if this is helpful, but in my experience, it was much harder when I had the one thing. Like, the scariest place in the world for me is to be sitting in a room by myself, writing the one screenplay for that no one is waiting on, because I'll never get it done. I'll spiral forever trying to improve it or perfect it. And the daunting reality that it's not good enough will just descend upon me. And in a way, having several projects going at once and having a little bit of pressure on the amount of time I'm even able to devote to them helps me not to overthink them too much. It forces me to kind of streamline my efforts in a lot of ways. And it also makes me less precious about them individually. And so you got to love on them, but they're sort of taken away from you quicker than you want them to be. And then one day you get the call and they're like, hey, this thing's going to go. And then that becomes your whole focus, and then you have to just do everything you possibly can to make sure that ship doesn't sink.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about some of the crews you're working with. And I have a couple questions on this, but starting off with like actors, when you were starting, you were kind of working with your friends or, local actors or people with not a lot of experience, maybe theater actors. And I remember like from Push Tim Haberger, we just spent so much time just talking about ways to make actors do things, like talking about action and goals and all of these different strategies to get the actor to do it better. But now you're working with actors who are, Hollywood stars or at least veterans, and who just, if you walk up to them and try and like strategize or try and judo them into some sort of acting technique, they're just going to laugh at you and they're just going to know what you want, So is it as simple as when you're working with these bigger actors to be like, go faster, slower, or how has your process and technique changed, or has it changed at all?
Sometimes faster is like the best direction because it's simple and somebody can go yes and they can take it and give it a shot. Sometimes the danger is getting into the psychoanalytic weeds, especially when you're on set and the clock is ticking. But for me, working at Push Theater in Atlanta for so many years was absolutely formative. Tim Habiger and Shelby Hofer were, the closest thing I ever had to mentors. And in that they taught me, and I think, our entire crew in a lot of ways, like a way to think about dramatic action and drama. They introduced us to some really challenging material through the theater. And there was an education through that process that I have clung to and has stuck with me forever. And a lot of that is just habits that you develop over time. I think no matter how challenging the filmmaking process can get, it's still a game that is largely won through the basics, which is like writing, acting, and directing, storytelling. Ironically, it's something that you can do with with a DSLR camera and a laptop. You can get all of that done. If you can make something compelling with those pieces, just with, those different crafts, you're halfway there in a way. But yeah, I think for me, it's been less about reading the right book about directing actors, although sometimes that can be helpful to kind of read and forget about and then, internalize. I think it's been more about spending time in an environment, making short films, working with actors, developing your own kind of gut process, your own trial and error relationship with how you get through difficult narrative moments and how you communicate to an actor. You have to have a personal relationship with it, and you have to be able to like try and fail, which means you need time on set, which means you need a period where you're just shooting stuff where there's not a lot of overhead logistics that necessarily get in the way. If you're only getting on set once every other year, when you've managed to raise the money and put everything together, when you're in this game that I'm talking about, where you have 8 projects going at once before you get on set, I think in the early days, you need a period where you're just shooting stuff all the time, and you'll develop habits with actors there that are essential. And in my experience, that has carried with all the way to, working on these bigger projects. And so, yeah, it's different when you're working with less experienced actors that are your friends than when you're directing. I just did this movie with Rebecca Hall, and she's brilliant and incredible and 8 steps ahead of me on almost everything that we're doing, and, most of the time I call cut and I want something and I'm fumbling to find a way to communicate it, and she'll pick the action out of what I'm saying and go, is this what you're looking for? And I'll go, oh yeah, that's totally it. Cause she's just, a world-class performer in that regard. So it's good to have humility in that moment. But I find that, having a way of communicating that I'm comfortable with, having something of a process that I can rely upon is useful and still something that I rely on constantly, especially when you're completely exhausted and it's hour 15 on set and you haven't slept in days, and and you're running out of time and you just need a quick way to communicate something simple. I find oftentimes it is the simple stuff, like maybe don't pick up the coffee cup, maybe faster when you walk across the room, maybe it's 1 beat instead of 2, sometimes it's just the simple stuff.
Right. So we had a question about producers. Obviously you've worked with quite a bit at this point. What are some of the things, and you're a producer now, so what are some of the things that has really stuck out for you for producers that you have worked with, and being like, okay, that's what I'm going to take to my next project. I like that person. They really got it together. And some things that are just like, that person is the worst and I never want to work with them again, without getting yourself in too much trouble.
Yeah. Producer is such an interesting title because it can be so many different things, especially on the project, on a project to project basis. Like, you may have a producer that's with you every step of the way. That's very much of an on the ground producer. Sometimes a producer is very much a figurehead, somebody who can help move things through the system somewhat and can offer you kind of sage advice from one step to the next. Sometimes producers are very much mired in, the numbers and simply the logistics of getting something done, more on the line producer side of things than the creative producer side of things. And sometimes the creative producers are very much about development and helping you realize what your story is and recognizing what, your skills are and being somewhat of a creative guide. So I think that title can mean a great many things. I mean, I think in my experience, what I found largely is that there's a lot of smart people out there making movies, and you know, it's helpful to recognize what somebody has on offer and what you can take from that, and you know, to listen when you have the opportunity, and to hear good advice, and to recognize when someone is helping you make what you're making, and to resist the temptation to be threatened. You know, I think sometimes, and I hear producers complain about this a bit, sometimes directors feel a need to project wisdom in all directions. And to, you know, I always get alarmed when someone is defensive about their vision in the abstract a little bit. I think there's a confidence in recognizing that it's a collaborative process, and that, you know, if you are the creative leader as a director, that, you know, it's useful to be able to justify your creative decisions to the people around you. You will only generate support and trust from them in that regard. And a good producer will recognize that, and will you know, be able to counterbalance what you're doing and help you realize that. So yeah, I think it's a very general response is just look out for the good ones, and people that have been doing it for a while probably know something that's pretty useful, and you can learn something from them. I would watch out for toxic personalities. They're real. There are people that are threatened by your gifts and will play games with you. And if you feel an unnecessary competition coming on with somebody, you know, that may be an obstacle that you kind of deal with early in the process. But when you end up on set and you're having to make split-second decisions and everything is at stake, and you're doing it all in front of the crew, and sometimes that stuff can balloon into bigger problems than are necessary. And I've been pretty fortunate on that front, but I have, you know, I know many filmmakers that have had textbook, like, terrible experiences with producers, and people that either didn't value the creative element of the project, didn't trust their director, tried to undermine them, tried to build alliances apart from them. All that stuff. I mean, again, I think toxic is the best word. You know, all that stuff is, if you can sense that coming from a mile away and you see it in people, like, you know, steer clear, and try, you know, I would also say, make sure it's not coming from you as well, and that other people around you that you trust are also recognizing the same things.
Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit, you do a lot of pitches at this point. Like, you have to go out there, and whether it's originally to some of your agencies, or to studios, or to financiers, like, you just sometimes have to talk about the thing you want to do. Can you talk a little bit about how what it's like to be in the room, some things you've learned about being good in the room, and maybe some good experiences and bad experiences that you've had?
I mean, everybody's got that story where you just totally bombed in the room. And it's great. I mean, I actually think, you know, failure should be something that we celebrate a little bit in this industry. You know, it's like, you should have a tribe around you that you can get together with afterwards and go, my God, I blew it. It was magnificent. You know, hopefully you're in a situation where you're able to take enough meetings that you can lose a few like that. You know, you're going to lose, you know, and these people hear a lot of different pitches, especially early on. They bring in a lot of different voices. Usually you're walking into a room where people are used to talking about a piece of material, and, you know, they've seen several different directors come in hat in hand and, you know, show their little presentation. And so they're more comfortable navigating that. You're usually on their turf. Usually, you know, you're either flying across the country, or you're driving all the way to Santa Monica to go in their office, where they are grounded and fortified in every way imaginable. And it's okay to be nervous. You know, I mean, I think they're used to seeing that stuff. But I've, you know, this question's come up over the years, and some people have some kind of like tried and true wisdom when it comes to pitches. And I don't really, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never known what I was doing. And so for me, it's often never much more complicated than you are there to inspire a group of people to see something the way you see it. And for them to understand how fucking cool that is, you know, and why it can connect to an audience. And however you can get that across, like whatever your gifts are as someone who communicates to other people, you know, with ideas. It's like, I tend to be a little bit of a tinkering story scientist. Like I get quite enamored with like, you know, why this reversal is exciting, and why if we present the audience early on with this question, why the reveal of it is so exciting by the end. Those are just the things that tend to fascinate me, you know, in the structure of storytelling, or why the weaknesses of a character are something that we all can't help but relate to, and why that makes us more vulnerable to the material as an audience, you know. Those are things I like talking about. Those are the things that intrigue me. And so those are the things that I lean on quite a bit. Over time, I feel like I've developed more of a, I would say I'm creeping towards a visual style. And a lot of that's because I've just collaborated with great people who have better eye than I do. And so part of the process has become, when I've been pitching a lot, to focus more on what I want to communicate visually, and like, do I have something like a consistent visual style? I've never felt a desire to be out front of that in a way, like, oh, here's what a Dave Bruckner film is. Like, I think if there's any consistency in the stuff that I've done, it's largely things I'm not aware of. It's just my own interest coming across from piece to piece. But it has become a little helpful to pay more attention to what that is and how I'm going to demonstrate it from project to project. And so I have a giant file at this point on my computer of just high resolution images that I've pulled from the internet over the years. And I reuse them from pitch to pitch from time to time because it's quick and it's a bit of a numbers game. And I know, like, oh, I can grab that one close up that I like and merge it with this other image, and I can, you know what the template is going to be. And so part of the job has become developing a process for creating visual presentations. But I find not only is the process of creating those images sort of useful for the pitch itself, but it also really educates me. You know, it's like it's become an important step in the process of making a film. Like even before I create the film itself, it's like helps me think about it in a lot of different ways. Also, apologize if you hear cello. My neighbor plays the cello every day, midday, especially now that we're all quarantined. So, yeah.
No, I actually find it really soothing when I'm there.
Yeah, you know the cello, yeah.
Yeah. The drummer I'm not as proud of, but the cello is nice.
Well, he could work on it. Yeah.
Go for it, Molly.
We have another question from one of our people. Dot McConnell asked, how did you find your voice in this industry, and what do you think your voice is? She's still figuring out hers and wants to produce. So I guess, how do you explore this and get to where you are now?
I mean, I think it's just, you know, what are you interested in? You know, and do you know, I find that I keep telling stories about states of anxiety. A lot of that is just because I've had opportunities in the horror genre. A lot of it's because I'm somebody who's dealt with anxiety in my life. I mean, we all have, but I've had some challenges on that front. And so, you know, I'm often drawing from my own experiences a bit to try and get a certain feeling on screen. And that becomes an ongoing project from project to project. It's like what I didn't really get right, you know, in the last one, maybe I can do that a little better in the next one. Another thing that I find I work with a lot is, you know, just, you know, the idea of the surreal or the uncanny, something that is like the reality that we understand, but a little bit different. And I love the sensation of that. And sometimes that manifests in the horror genre through like haunts or dream sequences. And so I think all my movies have had some bit of that at work. And so you kind of compare it from project to project and you improve upon it. And, you know, there's a lot of, I find there's a lot of different things that, a lot of different elements of the filmmaking process that you are familiar with the fact that you're doing something similar to what you did before, but in the context of the movie that people are seeing, it's not, you know, it's not something they need to really be aware of. So perhaps that, you know, has to do with voice. I think another thing is just, again, in the early stages, like frequency. Like make as much as you can, you know? And I think most importantly, like make stuff without a lot of friction to creation. I mentioned this earlier, like don't, you know, your first couple short films don't need to be, they don't need to be Hollywood quality necessarily. Like really do something down and dirty that you can shoot quick, that you can edit quick, and get really, really familiar with the medium. And you'll start to recognize certain patterns in your choices, and perhaps that's voice.
You know, it's funny. Since I've known you for a while, I know that you aren't necessarily a horror guy by nature.
Yeah.
Like you're not the horror nerd. Zoe is definitely more of that. You don't have horror tattoos and can name like Italian horror films from the 70s and shit. But like you have...
She can totally hear you, by the way.
I mean it. I don't take it back. She knows. So like it almost seems like you almost fell into the horror stuff a little bit. Would you say that that's fair? And if so, do you feel like you're locked into it, or do you think that is that important, or do you think that diversifying your palette, even if it is the same voice, is important?
I think that's to each their own completely. I mean, for me, for some reason, horror films were what I was like making on a VHS camcorder in the 90s when I was in high school, you know, and I made a horror film in college. And then I went through a phase where I, you know, wasn't interested in that anymore. And then came back to it. You know, one of the great things about working at Push Push is that one of the things I learned was, you know, we were doing like Pinter and Naomi Wallace and Frederick Schiller, you know, on stage. And then on the weekends we were going and throwing blood on the walls, you know, shooting these like, you know, gaudy camp horror films. And what I loved about it was the idea that there wasn't a firm distinction in my mind between high art and low art. Like it's all the same shit. It's all the, you know, the fine practice of holding someone's attention and drawing meaning from it over time, and you know, through the characters and through the events. And so I think what I found in that regard was that the horror genre was infinite for me, and that I would probably never bore of it. So yeah, it has something to do with the fact that, you know, I was part of a horror film that was successful, and so that's where my opportunities have been. And like anybody that's at this, you know, you stick with what works because you're desperately trying to make a living at this, you know. And I'm not willing to give up the fact that I can work as a director right now to suddenly leap to rom-coms. Like that would be, you know, quite a challenge to convince people. I mean, maybe somebody would give me a shot, but I'd have to convince them I could be funny. And, you know, so you kind of play within that field, but there are also these kind of like adjacent directions. So right now it's like, having made a few horror films, like the last movie we made, Nine House, is definitely like something of a haunted house riff. And even though it's more psychological, but I would say, you know, now I probably wouldn't want to go to a haunted house again, you know? And so I really want to do something that's sci-fi, but being my experiences, being my voice, or the patterns I've worked in, my toolkit, like when I get to science fiction, it's probably going to be pretty damn dark. It's just where I go. And probably rather frightening. You know, also thrillers. I would say the only like kind of wild card for me is I really, really, really want to make a sports movie.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I'm like dying to make a sports movie, you know. And
nothing I know about you says that.
I know. Well, I think that I think there's a really interesting, like, I think it's closer to horror than one might think in some regards. Also when you've been developing horror for years and like you're exploring all this dark shit, it's like sometimes you just, maybe this is the diversion that you were kind of, you know, pointing at, but like I not diversion, but like just change of direction, is that I kind of want, sometimes I want to tell a story about a bunch of people that get together and have a goal, and then at the end of it, they achieve it. Like that's not actually something that you get to do in the horror genre very often. So a real coming together, like a spirited rise. Like I think that's something that would be fun.
I will say though, like your films are very funny at times. Like VHS is hilarious at times when it's supposed to be funny. Like I think you're good at comedy when it's appropriate. Also, like Dave and Jeremiah is fucking hilarious. So
yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, no, I'll tell you, I would be terrified to make a movie that you were expected to laugh at.
Right.
You know, like I feel like that's not where my gifts lie necessarily. But you know.
Molly, did you have another one?
Yeah, so Melissa Simpson actually asked a question after selling the Night House at Sundance this year, which she was there with me at that screening. What does distribution look like with theatrical releases being up in the air right now? Are you navigating that in any way, in a really scary way, or do you think you have a handle on it?
Nope. No one knows anything. So I would say Searchlight has been great. You know, we are continuing to advance the conversation. I mean, something will happen, and I think everybody is still planning on a theatrical release. But I mean, yeah, we just don't know what the world's going to look like necessarily, and yeah, we'll see. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Seth Ingram had a question about your advice on working with agencies and packaging a film.
Yeah. I would just say for a director, beware of other people's agendas, especially if they just may not align with your own. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's good when everybody wants to make the same movie and they have the same thing to get out of it necessarily. And so sometimes, you know, if you're a director, you need to get a movie made, you know, and you need to get a movie made that's going to be good. So you need to insulate yourself from, you know, making the accidental bad movie, because it's only going to make it harder for you to go again. So you want to make sure all the creative content that you have is ready to go and that you're confident it can work. You know, sometimes it may be better for you to go shoot that $500,000 to $1 million movie, wherein you may feel privileged to have an agency get involved and want to put some actors on board, or a financier that's willing to give you the money, believes that you can cast up and wants to take that, you know, that swing at that big name actor. But you can end up in a you know, cyclical trap where they can only see the movie through the lens of like $3 to $5 million, and the chances of successfully financing the movie at $3 to $5 million are going to be much less. And especially depending on where you're at in your career, and you know, what propulsion you can put into the project, or how much faith people have in your name at that point, how much they're willing to bet on it. You may look at the situation and go, these people have, you know, you'll meet producers sometimes, and agents, the numbers through the roof, but they'll say like, yeah, I've got 30 projects in development right now. And you're like, well, I don't want to be number 31 because, you know, I need to make a movie. And it's easy for agents to package things and send it to actors. They can do that at a greater frequency than you can spend putting your heart and soul into something and developing it to the nines so it's ready to be produced. So yeah, I would just be conscious of the fact that, like, if you're getting started, or even if you're not, if you're years into this and you're a working independent filmmaker, like, sometimes beware the cast trap, especially. Like, there are great actors all around. I mean, most A-list stars are fucking incredible for a reason. And like, it'd be fantastic to work with them, but do you really want to spend 8 years waiting for the moment that somebody's going to swoop in and validate your movie and get it made, when you could make, you know, 6 movies in the interim with up and coming talent? And so, yeah, I'd watch out for that on the packaging front.
That's great. So obviously we're in a weird time right now, but I'd imagine your life hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot from the day to day, just because you kind of work when you're not on set anyway. Your office is at home, and you work from home for the most part. Do you have any tips and advice for people who may, for the first time, find themselves in the situation and having to make their own schedule and work from home and all these sorts of things? What does your day normally look like, and what kind of regimens do you put yourself through?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Zoe, my partner, she writes as well. So we're usually both around the apartment during the days, working together. It's certainly, I find it's great to have somebody else around if you can, you know, to kind of keep you on task necessarily. Also helps eat healthy and, you know, treat it a little bit like a job. Put on pants, always put on pants, that matters. Yeah, I don't know. I would say, I would actually say, and this is gosh, I don't know that this goes with the current situation. I would say in the old world, when I was writing and developing and spending a lot of time by myself, it got to be very lonely. And so it was important to go meet a friend, have some coffee, bounce ideas off another human being face to face from time to time. I know now we're doing that, you know, a lot through video chat. I just think you can very much get into an echo chamber of your own thoughts, and it's important to socialize when you're working at home and find a way to do that. So I think we're all learning how to do that together. I will say video conferences have been through the roof lately. Hollywood seems to be plowing forward. I guess most industries are doing this. We're all on Zoom, and you know, this is a fascinating moment in that regard. So yeah, that might be the only advice that I have, is just stay in touch with people by all means.
Actually, Charles Judson had an interesting question to follow up with that. Can you give any advice on managing the different speeds and successes like your friends and peers have had throughout the years? Like not so much the jealousy, but like the friendship as you're at different tier levels, I guess, in your careers. And now you're in different places.
Interesting. Hey, Charles. It's been a while since I talked to Charles. It's great to hear from him. I would say, like, amongst the working directors that I know, and not working directors, is that we're all always just doing this. You know, people get moments, and oftentimes they fall apart. Every time I thought I was over the hump and like, okay, good, this thing's smooth sailing now, you know, filmmaking would just kick my ass, and something would fall through and it would become massively uncertain again. So I find that really, it really teaches you to be humble. And if you're fortunate, then you understand that it's a gift, you know, and that, you know, hopefully, you know, if one of your friends succeeds a great deal, then that'll open up, you know, more opportunities for the people that they're close to, you know. And it can be tricky because you can sometimes compete with the people around you, but the truth is, and we all know it, is that, you know, if one of us makes a movie and accelerates, it only helps the people around us. And so I think it's important to keep all of that in mind necessarily, and don't believe the hype, positive or negative. And if you're fortunate to get something out there and the internet says horrible things about you, welcome to the club.
It's funny. I've had this experience with you specifically because when you were out here, you know, I was doing the art department on your little commercials with Cooper lighting and everything, and then doing stuff with VHS and, you know, your other shorts. And then you started moving up, and I knew that I wasn't going to be production designing it, and not be with any sort of like, jealousy or frustration, but I just knew that my desire to be a production designer was not matching your desire to be a filmmaker. So of course I'm not going to like do the work that I needed to do to become a production designer on The Ritual. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so I had to understand that about myself and embrace that, and not like, I make it a point to try not to get jealous about people who are doing things that I wasn't wanting to do in the first place. Like, I'm not going to be jealous of a figure skater winning the gold medal because that's not what I want to do. And so I'm not going to be jealous of the production designer who is designing The Ritual, because that's not necessarily the level that I am trying to get to right now for my career. I'm doing other things. So I think to have a level of perspective and not let the jealousy bug or just the FOMO get into you, and just appreciate, like, I fucking appreciate my relationship with David Bruckner. I appreciate the fact that he lets me sleep on his couch when I'm in LA sometimes. And
all the time. Every time you're in LA. Yeah.
and you're the only person that I talk to on the phone, like literally. So I appreciate the relationship more than, you know, any sort of competitive thing that may arise, you know.
Sure. No, I think that's great. I think it's well said. I mean, I think, but you're an interesting case because you do so many different things, you know. I mean, like you're a filmmaker that is plowing forward as a director and a writer and all these different things. And so that's a lot of the ways that we collaborate and continue to collaborate and stuff. So it's like, yeah, I mean, and there's also, I think, the circumstances in which a movie come together are often so unique. You know, it's like when we made Ritual, it was we were going to hire a Romanian production designer because it absolutely made financial sense. Like in that particular case, like I was only able on that production to bring 3 of my former collaborators to the table. I brought Andrew Shulkin, who was the cinematographer on Southbound, Josh and Sierra Russell, who's the SFX team that I've worked with on Southbound, and then Ben Lovett, who I go way back with, composer. And a lot of that was like circumstantial. And so I think it's the other thing is that crew, if you're very focused on a particular crew position, you're going to work a lot more than a particular director. Same with actors. You can do several different shows in a year. A director is, an independent film director is lucky if they get 1 film out every 3 years. So that changes a great degree, how much we sync up necessarily as well. So it's good to roll with it. And it's also great to fight for collaborations. It can be a lonely profession at times, and it's just good to have frequency with people. So I would also say the counterpoint to it is to push for those when they're available. But, I think everybody should do so with respect.
Did you have any more questions, Molly?
Yeah, so Rob Scheimer had another question, and he asked, what if, as an independent filmmaker specifically, is shooting in 4K really that important, and is there equipment that he should buy versus just renting?
I mean, I'm told that, what was the recent figures that like Netflix, the deliverable specs are changing, and that Netflix is acquiring things only in 4K, but then, they bought the Ritual, and Ritual was, we mastered out at 3.1. So I think people are going to be after great content, regardless of the resolution. I mean, if you have the opportunity to shoot it in 4K, great. But personally, I think resolution's kind of overrated. But if it's a potential roadblock down the road to getting a feature film sold, it's probably worth finding a camera that, could support that. Although I think the Alexa that we shot on doesn't support it. I think actually we shot in 2.8 on Night House, and we're up-resing to 4K. So I don't know. It's murky. Yeah.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
There is a question about competitions.
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
Yeah, it was Michelle Caruso. She asked, what are your thoughts on submitting pitches and scripts through competitions versus being more boots on the ground when networking and trying to get the film off the ground that way?
I mean, the latter has been my experience. I've had friends that have had luck with competitions before. I would just be suspect of a situation where you are killing yourself, to make something that can only exist in a very, very narrow space, that is then voted upon by a narrow group of people one time. It's the amount of energy that it takes to make a film, even a small short film with your friends. You want to be able to own it. You want to be able to distribute it on the internet, show it to whoever you want. You want it to be a showcase for your work that has no barriers, And so if a competition is a way to motivate you to create a piece of work that you're excited about, great. But I think if you're counting on winning filmmaking competitions, it's just, I wouldn't even bother with that too much.
Great. Let's do 1 or 2 more, and then we'll get going.
Yeah. Andre Flater asked, of the main projects you're working on at any given time, how many are written by other people, and how many opportunities do you get to direct scripts other than the ones that you've written? And what is the benefit of each, like writing your own scripts versus working on other people's things?
Again, I mean, obviously everybody's experience with this is different. There's some people that are exclusively writer-director, and that's how they know how to do things. And then there are people that, don't write at all, but direct. I do a bit of both. I would say of the 8 things that I'm developing right now, I am probably, I don't even know if it's 8 at the moment, but that's been kind of the norm. I would say that I probably am a writer. I am actually typing words on the page in probably 2 or 3 of them. I'm a bit slow as a writer. It takes a lot out of me. I think it's the hardest part of this whole job. So I definitely benefit from developing relationships with other very talented writers, and in a healthy way. You know, I compete with them, sometimes alone in my mind at the keyboard, but there's also kind of a middle ground where you're just developing stuff. You know, like we did there was a TV show that I developed year before last, with a writer that I know here in Los Angeles. It was an idea that we've been talking about, and we pitched it around town, and we found a financier company, like production company, that's wanted to act as a studio that got behind it. So they financed a mini room. So they took our pitch. The mini room was us plus 6 other writers, and we basically cracked 10 episodes over the course of 3 weeks. Everybody got paid, you know, some version of WGA rates, and it was kind of a formal process. And in that, you're also writing. You know, like I'm writing. I'm basically show running with, you know, my writing partner. But then he went off and drafted the pilot based upon that material. But I feel very much like a writer. We're sculpting the entire thing together. So yeah, it's a bit of both, and I think it varies project to project. But I find that working with other writers has been illuminating in every way imaginable. You know, so whether, you know, I'm typing notes on their work or they're giving me notes on theirs, like, you know, trading in that regard is essential.
Right. Molly, you got a couple more?
Yeah. So Don McConnell was asking, because a lot of the people here obviously don't really have the option to move to LA right now.
Sure.
Do you have any good tips for resources or that people can do to get someone to want to invest in their film, especially if they're like not in LA?
Yeah, it's, you know, I don't have a great answer to that. You know, again, I go back to the Wild West of it all. I mean, you guys may be able to speak on this much better than I can. I think if you're going to create shorts, you're probably going to have to find a way to pay for them yourself, or at least that's how we've done it. You know, I know Raymond and I a great deal, and I'm sure probably you as well, Molly, is you're working to do something, hopefully as close to filmmaking as you can. If you have another way to make money, great. But you're then pulling those relationships. Like I was doing commercials, industrials, anything I could get my hands on. And you're pulling people from those experiences into the short filmmaking process, and hopefully scraping enough money together to make that project. And then, you know, once you have the short, then it's just a question of getting people to see your short. I have to be a firm believer that if you make a really stellar short film, something that really connects with people and is incredibly memorable and has a unique voice to it, that people will see it. They will trade it around. You know, people are hungry in the financing portion of this industry to find talent. Agencies are hungry to find talent. You know, managers are hungry for that as well. And so I find that my experience has been focus on the content and the rest will come. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but yeah, maybe that's useful.
Yeah, that kind of actually leads into my last question, which is for me, because, you know, I work as a production designer all the time, and I want to write and direct, and it's hard to find time to write, and obviously hard to get projects off of the ground. How do you deal with, or how do you make the decision of what job to take? Because obviously you do a lot of director for hire stuff, like with Crazy Legs here and Creepshow, and obviously those things probably are not quite equal and being exactly what you want to be doing in the future. How do you decide what job to take? Mm-hmm. Are you ever worried that you made the wrong decision taking a job?
Oh yeah. Oh yes. Yes, I've had films that I was attached to that I secretly was, you know, happy that they fell apart because I was very worried that I wouldn't be able to pull them off. I guess I'm in a moment right now where it is about, a lot of it is just career strategy. Like, what moves me closer. Like, look, a big part of it is making a living. And it's like, what moves me closer to making something that can be somewhat sustainable? I'm 42 years old. You know, I've just joined the DGA, so I've only begun with a pension. And so some real life stuff kicks in of like, will I be able to continue to do this? And as much as, you know, I want to believe solely in the creative journey, I also have to balance that against, you know, not fucking this up and making choices that are things that I think I can succeed at. And a lot of that is creative. A lot of that is reading scripts and going, sometimes I look at something and I'm like, this is a really great piece of material, but like, I don't know that I'm the right person for it. You know, I don't know that my experiences speak to this. You know, I turn down a lot of scripts that deal with family because I'm not a father, you know, and I don't have a lot to contribute to that. Now, maybe that would change, or I would read something where I would connect to it necessarily, but I tend to choose projects that I understand something about the core material that I think I can contribute to that can help it succeed, and that is ultimately a strategic decision as well. And it's an inspirational decision. It's also something that I can look at something and go, I can spend 2 years of my life in this headspace. You know, sometimes you look at an opportunity and you're like, I'd be bored of this in 3 weeks. Well, then that's not a good strategic decision. You're not going to be as good of a director if you choose that. So you want to be completely enamored with the material, and people can smell your enthusiasm. And so I think that's real. But yeah, I would say other than that, you know, be scrupulous about whether or not you're choosing something that, you know, has good producers on it, has the right kind of support. You know, I think, you know, to the degree that you can see through murky waters, you know, try and identify problem situations that are ultimately going to be a waste of your time.
You know, we used to talk about this, like, if there's a ratio that we wanted to figure out, because if this thing that I'm going to apply for is all about money, then you're failing. If it's about the money, but then you get some sort of creative outlet about it, then you're doing okay. But if you get only getting creative outlets about it and there's no money, then you're still might be failing a little bit. So like there's some sort of like Goldilocks ratio to all of that thing, where it's like, okay, well, the money is kind of crap, but I'm going to get a lot out of this creatively, then let's go for it, you know? Or the money is so good that I can't, but I'm only getting a little bit out of creatively, I still kind of have to go for it, kind of a thing. So there's a lot of those that we find.
Totally. And then sometimes too, it's just about expanding your experience. You know, it's like I directed an episode of Creepshow, and it's like, look, a lot of that is like, I'm a huge fan of Creepshow. A lot of that was like, I was excited to work with that team. I was excited to come back to Atlanta and work with a lot of my friends that I hadn't seen in a while that were on that show. But I loved the stories. I thought they really had a handle on how to bring the Creepshow tone back. But also, you know, I wanted more TV experience. You know, I'm trying to build a fail-safe where if I don't get a feature going, I can go do a couple episodes of television. And, you know, part of that is having a reputation of being reliable on the television front. So I think, you know, there's a lot, you know, a lot of different reasons to take a job. And also, like, it's just hard to get a job sometimes. Sometimes it's just like, someone's going to pay me to make a movie, you know? I mean, that's maybe I have to make this work. Maybe it's not the perfect situation, but I have to make it, you know, something that can succeed.
Great. Amazing. David Bruckner, good talking to you, buddy.
You guys are the best. Thanks for letting me talk about myself for an hour.
Yeah, that was amazing.
We love it. So yeah, Molly, you want to talk a little bit about what's coming up for Film Impact, the grants and all that jazz?
Yeah, so obviously on April 1st, we are still moving forward with opening our fall 2020 grant. So on April 1st, you can go to our website, filmimpactgeorgia.org, and apply for that. So yeah, we're still moving forward with that. We'll be making some more announcements today or tomorrow about additional things that we're doing via Zoom as well. And so we're really excited to keep taking advantage of this time, and we're very appreciative of your time, Dave.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and please let us know if you guys have any thoughts about what changes we could make, or any other subjects you guys want to know about. Please keep us informed. I think that's it. Dope.
Cheers, guys. Stay safe.
Bye.